So we stopped the last tape at an important moment where you were describing a horrible day and having to say goodbye to your grandparents. And that's where we stopped. So I continue.
Okay. Yes, it was a horrible day because it was, as far as I'm concerned, it was the last time I ever got to see that part of the family. And from that point on, it was a true fight for survival, daily survival. Let me...
Where were you on your way? You were hiding, we stopped when you were hiding somewhere with your mother and your sister.
Yes, well, that particular day after we said goodbyes, there was a big scale where they weighed the beets. You know, they grew sugar beets in Stav-Novokoski, and there was a railroad train and a big scale station. And underneath the scale station, I don't know how my mother happened to have known about it. There was kind of a room underneath to you could stay, and she took the two of us down there, and we just stayed there until nightfall, because during the day, at that point, you couldn't move anymore during the day, because we were warned by the Soltis that I described, the guy in charge of Stav-Novokoski, that we must all go to the ghetto and Izbica. If not, he would catch us and take us there by force. Worse yet, he would kill whoever wasn't obeying. And so then just everybody had to go, whether they ran away or they went. It depended on whatever the people felt they could do.
Did your grandparents stay, or did they go?
No, they went.
They went.
Yes. They went with my aunt, Amand and her younger daughter, Paula. No, Hannah. Her name was Hannah. No, it was Paula, I'm sorry. Hannah was the oldest one. And Paula from Mima Branch's daughter with her baby. That's Dufch's wife. They all went. They went to a certain village. And from that village, they all went to the ghetto in Zamość, and then Izbica. For us, this particular, as far as I'm concerned, this particular day really started what I would call the survival, to try to survive the Second World War. And we stayed under those scales for that day, and then we went back to this guy Halasse at night, and he
The farmer.
That farmer, and he put us up in another village where we started hiding out for a while. The status of everybody else in the family from that point on was a tragic situation, as that day they gathered whoever went to the ghetto, and within 10 days the whole ghetto was liquidated. So everybody that went there was taken by railroad cars, and they were shipped to Sobibor, most of them to Sobibor, and wherever else they might have been shipped, but to the best of my recollection, whoever got caught was shipped to Sobibor, and there was a concentration camp there. Some of them were put to work, and the rest of them were gassed. And that's what happened to our family, including our grandparents and part of our aunts, and of course your father's first family perished over there, and Uncle Moshe's first family perished over there. Aunt Esther's brother's first family perished over there. Everybody perished over there, except the few that were put to work, like this Mr. Bielovich that Arnie knows. I guess they were selecting in that concentration camp according to what kind of work the man could do or the woman could do, and if they could use that work, that they kept them that way. Otherwise, they gassed the people. So it wasn't.
You were saying yesterday, not in the tape, when we were having dinner, that the men, my father, Morris, your father, they were someplace else when this liquidation happened.
Correct.
Are you going to get to it, or should we? You want to talk?
I'm going to get to it as we go along. As far as I and my sister and my mother, to a degree my father as well, we were hiding from place to place at that point. We stayed one place a week or two, and another place a week or two, and it wasn't like getting into one point. Now, where was the rest of the family that had not been caught in the ghetto and not been liquidated, such as your father and Uncle Moshe, Nathan, Esther, Esther's brother Ephraim? They never went into the ghetto. Nathan and Esther never went into the ghetto neither. They also detoured and ran away. And Ephraim, he also got away. Your father, he got away. He was not in the ghetto that much, and he got away, and so did Uncle Moshe. They were hiding. I did not know where they were hiding, but I know that they did hide. And
do you know, I mean, you were in hiding at this point, but I guess I wonder, you don't know how they found out what happened to their families?
Well, they knew that their families were killed in Sabibor because nobody survived. Subsequently confirmed when Philip Bielovich, there was an uprising at the end of 1943 in Sobibor.
About like the movie show. Yeah.
Like the movie showed. I don't know exact time period. It's end of 43 or beginning of 44 when the uprising took place. I don't know the exact months, but there was an uprising, and Philip was a witness to the liquidation of the ghetto, because he was part of those that was liquidated, and he got to Sabibor, and they selected him and his brother to work in the pharmacy and other functions.
This is Philip Peltz?
Philip Bielovich, not Philip Peltz. No, Philip Peltz ran away to hide. And he and some other people worked in the pharmacy and also in separating the belongings from the dead people. After they gassed the people, they pulled out the gold teeth and all the belongings and so forth. Now, I am telling you what he told me. Fortunately, I wasn't there. I wouldn't be here to tell you the story. So he was doing all these jobs, and he's the one that confirmed the death of the families of all our relatives that were not able to escape or did not stay outside of the ghetto, like your father and the other uncles were managing to stay out of the ghetto. So on that premises, I can tell you that they were all perished.
No, I understand. I think my question wasn't clear. It had to do with, did you, who told, how did they, I don't know, the question is how, what, do you know when the moment was or the time was that those fathers and husbands became aware that their families were gone?
You see, the ghetto, Izbitsa ghetto, before its final liquidation, when we were told to go there, they were liquidating the Izbitsa ghetto a couple of months before that. And your father's family and Uncle Moshe's family went before that. They did not go in the final liquidation. They were sent off way before that. And when you get sent off to those camps, you just don't come back. I mean, yes, people survived these camps. Certainly didn't survive. If you'd have survived Sobibor, you would have participated in the uprising, and either you were killed or you ran away, and then you would come back into the areas that we were in, just like Philip Bilovich came back into the area that we were in, which was, let's say, the home base of what we were hiding, right? Which was Izbitsa and its surroundings. And so each people who were shipped into a camp and then they would escape would go back into an area where they were familiar with.
Right. When was the first time you saw your uncles after all this began and the liquidations had already taken place?
I saw them in, it would be end of October of 1942 in the Kaminilom.
In the what?
A place called Kaminilom. Kaminilom is it's a hole that the farmers would dig phosphate out of, and it would become like an underground house, you know, and that's what you call a Kaminilom in Jewish. And how I got there, I'll tell you as I go along in 1942, and that's where I found Uncle Yossel and Uncle Moshe amongst maybe 30 other surviving Jews and relatives. So if I'll continue back to now starts our phase of hiding and trying to survive all this. And now we're talking in September of 1942. I can tell you one thing. It seems to me that surviving a day in those days to me seemed like an eternity. Like, I mean, a day was like a year, because when you were hiding, it's just time stands still for you. At least it stands still for me. I recollect as a kid, you were hiding on the roof of a barn, and there was just nothing to do. I mean, you were laying down and you stared at the little corner you had, and you just saw nothing. And then it's like a forever. So when you talk about days out of that particular situations, as I recall it, it was an eternity. The movement was no movement. When you were hiding, you couldn't move around. You couldn't talk. You had to whisper. And it was whenever you got the food, it was once a day. Whenever whoever was hiding, you could hand it to you. When we were hiding, my parents or my mother, if it's either my mother was with me and my sister, or my father and my mother. And we used to pay for the people hiding us. Where we got the money from, I don't know. But somehow we had money to pay for it. I don't recollect us being rich, but somehow there was enough money to do that. So the first 3 or 4 weeks we were just moving around at night, from being a few days in one place to being a few days in another place. Sometimes we were in a place where the people wouldn't be aware that we are there. We had enough food for a few days. We would be in a barn, and then we would just leave at night and go to another place. Until finally, this Halassa made a deal with my mother. He was supposed to take us to another village, to his brother, to stay. And on the way, he double-crossed us. Instead of taking us to the village, he was taking us to the German commandantur, where the Germans were to be shot. And my mother kind of sniffed it out by looking and telling us that he's not taking us to where he's supposed to, that this is a different way, and preparing us to jump off the wagon. And we jumped off the wagon, and we started walking and hid in the fields. He was looking for us, couldn't find us. My father was not with us. I don't recall why my father was not with us on this particular day. Perhaps he was gathering some things to where to stay next or whatever, okay? But there would be days where he wouldn't be with us. There would be days where he would be with us. And we finally got to a point where we found a new place where we would stay. Now, at this point, you, Arnie, asked me, what did they do to Polish people at this point? Now we are in the winter of 1942, winter meaning, the winter in Poland gets to be early. October starts snowing, November you get snows. So at that point, they started getting rid of some Polish people, not killing them on the spot, but what's called wysiedlić. Wysiedlić means the Germans would come into an area, and they would tell the Poles to get out of this, let's say, village, and they would bring in Hungarian and Romanian Volksdeutschen to take over. And that was happening a lot. Now, they would not take these Polish people and execute them on the spot, or they would arrest the man and send them to some kind of work camps, from what I understood. The woman, and the kids, they would just chase out, and they had to leave everything, all the belongings on where they were, and they would bring in these people from those two countries and start have them live there and give them all the land. And that was the beginning of persecution of the Gentile Poles. Persecution meaning they wouldn't send them just to be exterminated like they send the Jews. What they would do is catch the males, whatever age, and put them into work camps, including concentration camp work camps, and a lot of them didn't survive, and a lot of them, I guess, survived, we are here. I, for one, am not at this point trying to do a history of what happened to them. Only a history of what happened to us and our family. So, but as a byproduct, I can tell you that they did do that to these Polish people. There's more to it than just what I'm mentioning, but for what we are trying to accomplish, I think it'll suffice to say that the Poles were under belligerence from the German side, but not in an exterminative way, like against the Jews. The Poles were, despite the fact that they were being chased out of areas and being arrested and put into work camps and so forth in the German efforts to try to win the war, at the same time, whoever was against the Jew. So it was one of those things. Yes, they were being persecuted by the Germans, but at the same time, they had it enough. Hey, we get the Jew anyway, and that's a terrible part. That's a part that, as far as I'm concerned, I'll never forgive them for that. You know? So I'll just leave that particular part of it and go back to trying to survive the most difficult parts of trying to survive the war. So here we are now in that new place, and if my memory serves me right, it was called can't remember the name of the village. It just went away from my mind. Maybe I'll remind myself later. At any rate, they threatened to chase all the Poles out of that village. So what happened is you had no Poles in that village. Only you had houses that you could go into and animals. You know, it was all yours. Until they came to bring in those Romanians and Hungarians, you could say, so we happened to go into one of those houses, chose one of the houses. It was fenced off from every angle, and you had to hear Germans coming in if they would come in. And we made ourselves at home over there. Now, who was there? Time frame right now, we're talking about end of October, beginning of November of 42. My mother, my sister, my father, Uncle Nathan, we are there, okay?
Is Esther with him?
No, at this particular week, Esther was not with him. And we are just being bosses over there, cooking and having, as far as food was concerned, it was the best food I've ever eaten for a long, long time, you know. And Mom was cooking and so forth. It was a period of maybe 10 days. And
did you know it was short-lived?
Yes, we knew that it was just a stopover. And we used to sleep not in the house, but in the barn. And we went to sleep in the barn that night, and suddenly my mother wakes us up, and she says, Kinder, which means children, and meaning my father, meaning everybody else, I have a bad feeling tonight. The Germans might come. Let's go back into the house. Because if they come in and we don't hear, we're dead. Because there was no place to run out then. Because from the house, you could open up a back window and go into the field. Okay? And we're going back in there and just hanging around, not going to sleep. And suddenly we hear knocks in the window on the outside and in the thing in German saying, let us in, let us in, let us in. And before I know it, my father opens up the back window and scoots right out. I didn't see him anymore. You know, it just scoots right out, doesn't wait for anybody else. Perhaps he was showing the way. And Uncle Nathan follows. And then me and my sister and my mother follow, and we start running away from that particular farm. Nobody shoots after us. By the time the Germans got in there, they didn't realize whether somebody ran out or not. And we're running away, and it is snow. The snow is on the ground, and there's no sight of my father. And we're walking, and then Uncle Nathan said that he's going to walk someplace else, wherever he was going to go. And my mother said, don't do that, he can't leave us. And Uncle Nathan said, okay, he'll take us with him. So we were walking straight down, and through the woods. We're talking about, now I'm 9 years old at this point. And as a matter of fact, on the way down, we caught maybe 2 or 3 rabbits that were hooked up because the Gentiles used to put out those traps. We caught, there was 3 rabbits where, and Uncle Nathan took them. And pretty soon I'm getting tired. You know, you're talking about walking kilometers and kilometers and kilometers. Now, it's no excuse for me, but somehow I was giving out. I just couldn't walk. And so Uncle Nathan said, and my mom said, we're hitting a village pretty soon, and let's just try and make it to that village, and perhaps we can get some shelter over there. What was going to be our disguise? Now, one thing, we spoke Polish fluently. Not all Jews spoke Polish, I want you to know. In Poland in those days, the Jews that were religious, they hardly spoke Polish. Some of them didn't understand Polish at all. They never went to Polish school or anything like that. Now, on the contrary, I and my sister and my mother, we spoke Polish fluently. Perhaps I wasn't as fluent in Jewish as I was in Polish. And I was blonde. I didn't look Jewish. My sister didn't look Jewish neither. So we kind of passed as Gentiles. My mom knew how to cross herself, how to say the Christian prayer. So, I mean, on that score, it was like we could pass as Gentiles. And at the same time, like I told you, they were throwing out these Polish people from certain areas. So what that was, we hit a house right off the woods was these 3 what you call rabbits, and we came into the house and we said that we're being evicted by the Germans, and they said, yeah, we heard about it. Oh, that was great, right? My child, my son, and my daughter, and this, my brother, and these people said, very nice, we'll put you up, we'll give you some food, which they did, and I fell asleep. The reason that I remember falling asleep is because when my mother woke me up, she said, quickly, got to get going out of here. I said, what's the matter, Mama? And she said, they went to get Germans. Because what happened is we stayed with these people, and it was lucky for us that we had some rest, because I couldn't go on anymore. And I don't know what would have happened if I would have fell on the ground, you know. We were there all day, and while I was sleeping, I guess they must have deducted that we weren't really a Gentile, we were Jews. And so my mother said, I didn't see that, but my mother said that the boss of the house, excused himself, and it was snowing. And he said he'd be right back. And maybe an hour passed by, and the nearest police station must have been 2 hours away. So what he went to the police station. He was going to bring the Germans to catch us. But we kind of foiled that and said, thank you very much, blah, blah, blah. And they said, no, stay. Don't worry, we'll put you up, it's okay. Now we'll go. And so we left. It was already getting dark. We're walking through this village, and a lot of activity, kids were riding on their sleds, and it was very festive. Yeah. And we were just going forward, away from this particular place. At that point, I was rested again, I could walk again, so I was okay. And where do we go? We go to this communulum. How did we know about that? I didn't know about it, but somehow my mother and my father and Uncle Nathan, and probably in conjunction with your father and Uncle Moshe and whoever else, knew to say, hey, if we survive this particular eviction, where we had to go to the ghetto, this was like 2-3 weeks after, a good place to hide is a communulum. And how would you, when you get there, it was camouflage, and how do you had to get in there, you had to have a password. And I remember the password was Amhu, and whoever had to respond, Israel. Otherwise, you couldn't get in. So even as unorganized as the Jews were in 1942, they had a little bit organization where, at least in our end of the woods, in our family, somehow came to this Amhu Yisrael. That's the first time I heard about this, because I hear when we finally walked over there and we knock into the hall and somebody says something, and we say Amhu, and they say Israel. Opens up and we get in there. And you go into a big, big hall. We went in, candle lit, and I see my father. My father comes running to me. And he was crying unbelievably. He thought we were killed. It was like a miracle to him that he saw me, my sister, and my mother. And he for sure thought that we weren't going to survive this. And who else do I see? Your father. And who else do I see there? Uncle Moshe. And who else do I see there? Yosale. Plus maybe 20, 30 other Jews that weren't probably our relatives, or maybe some distant relatives, I don't know. So now we are in this communalom, right? And we stay there a couple of days, and the decision was made that this was no place to try to survive. Now, try to understand this, that at this point in 1942, the Germans had, as they realized later, prematurely liquidated the ghetto. In other words, too many Jews were on the outside yet, scrounging around and trying to survive. And believe it or not, they knew it. The Germans knew it. So the next thing they do is the Germans post signs where they figured the Jews were hiding and hanging around in the woods on the outside of the Germans never went inside the woods. They were afraid for one reason or another to go into the woods. They put up signs, Judenstadt. Judenstadt meaning the ghetto is on. You can come back to the ghetto. After liquidating it and being liquidated for maybe 2 or 3 months and getting rid of everybody, now they became smart and they wanted. It's the winter time. The hardest part to survive for us was in the winter. The winters in Poland are vicious, and to walk from place to place, and with the skimpy clothes we had, I had hardly winter clothes on. It was a rough deal. So they were smart enough to put Judenstadt, which means the ghetto is on. You can come to the ghetto. So hiding from place to place, and we're talking about weeks, because we didn't get back into the ghetto all over again until towards the end of November of 1942. And in between, we were hiding in communaloms, halls underneath. In one particular spot, it was a vicious snow. And before you knew it, I don't know where my father found this, but he found another hole in the ground. And we open up this hole, and what do you know? There's another Jewish family there. 2 girls and a father. And he told us this Polish man was bringing food once a day, and you had to pay X amount of zlotys. So he would bring a little bit more. We could stay there for a while. And you know what? I was very happy to see other couple of kids, because the girl was my age, and another girl was my sister's age, those 2 daughters of theirs. And I was very happy to be with them. And we hung around there maybe a week. It was very warm underneath. You'd be surprised in the winter. on the ground, it's pretty warm, you know? And plus, these people had a lot of things. They had blankets and covers, with all sorts of stuff. So they lent us some too, and it wasn't cold. At any rate, we stayed there for about a week, and that particular time, fortunately, were the four of us. You know, now in that period, from the time I left the Kamienlom, you know, that hiding place, until we got back into the ghetto, which was at the end of November. And remember, I said that they reactivated the ghetto. And the reason they reactivated the ghetto is because they knew there were a lot of Jews got away from the villages and all that, never got to the ghetto. And they wanted to catch everybody all over again so they could liquidate everybody. Now for us, the ghetto at this particular point was a savior, because as much as we wanted to survive, we were running out of places to go, and in the winter it was rough. So I guess my parents, I didn't make the decision, my parents made the decision to go back to the ghetto after we saw these signs. And on the way, we met up with Uncle Nathan and Esther and Ephraim. They were hanging around together. Between the time from the, from the Kamienlom to the time that we were going back to the ghetto, I did not see your father or Uncle Moshe. They were hiding someplace else, and I wasn't aware where it was. So now we all went back to the Ishbitzer ghetto all over again. Now this time, when you went in, you couldn't get out anymore. Because the ghetto, as you come in, the way Ishbitzer Jewish part was constructed, the real Jewish part was, there was houses right on the right-hand side, houses on the left-hand side, an opening to go in, and that opening, you had to go back out that way, because the only other way you could go out, because Ishbitzer was surrounded by mountains, very tall mountains, you could climb the mountain and go out that way if you made the effort. And there was no police policing the mountain. But up front you had two rows, suddenly I saw two rows. Polish police, which were called Volksdeutschen, those are the, and with some Latvians, they were converts to the German cause, and they were very vicious. And they had the Judenrat police. Judenrat police was a form of shall we say, police that the Germans used to lure the Jews in, so they are governed by themselves, you know. They formed a group of Jews with this Judenrat. Everybody was wearing an armband said Judenrat police on it, and member Judenrat, which that was meant that they were those that were administering the ghetto, and they were the ones selecting people to be given to the Germans for supposed work, and they were the ones that were given around the rations, because when you get into the ghetto, you used to get a little food, either from a kitchen that they had, or they used to give you, and you cook yourself. And the stuff they gave you was very meager. Hardly you could survive on it. Outside of the ghetto, there was the temple, our temple. And what they formed was a temple wache, the guard of the temple. They recruited the Jews, and my father and your father and Uncle Moshe were working in the temple wache. Every morning they used to be marched to the temple wache place, and every night they were marched back. Now what was the purpose of that? Just as soon as they reopened the ghetto, and that's another reason they reopened the ghetto, not only to get workers, but they shipped Jews from Austria, some from Germany, some from Slovakia, some from Czechoslovakia. They told them there that they shipping them for resettlement because the kind of Jews that would come weren't the regular Jews. They were already second-generation Christians, but they had a grandparent, a Jew, or some mixture of Jewish blood. The males weren't even circumcised that would bring in. They didn't consider themselves Jews, but they brought them into camp, took all their things away. They made them carry I watched in the ghetto, and by the way, I was the only kid in the ghetto. Everybody else was older than me. There was nobody younger than me, except later on when Hannah had a baby boy that unfortunately she suffocated it. She suffocated the baby. And I saw it. It made a bad impression on me. That's where I got the idea, doesn't anybody want to protect a kid, you know? And I felt alone. I wanted to be older. I wanted to be fighting. I just couldn't stand being the little kid looking at all these things and nobody there to do anything for me, you know. Not that my father left me alone or anything like this, but that's what was around. The rest of the people in the camp, in the ghetto, were older, like my sister. You know, my sister's 4 years older than me, or older than her, and I just was all by myself amongst 3,000 people, the only kid around. And I looked at all these things. I watched all these things happening. So what happened is they took the stuff away from the Jews. Brought their stuff as soon as they crossed into the ghetto. The police took away everything. They told them, put everything away. You can't have this. And they put it on big wagons, and this Temple Wache Jews used to pull it into the temple, break it up, and assort it into different clothing. And that's what, after they assorted it in the temple, they used to ship it someplace. But at the same time, they would kind of enrich themselves with these things. So that was part of this whole operation. So now we are now back into what you call, into the ghetto. Now, what's the status of our family at this particular time, right? Let's take inventory of who's alive and who isn't. Who's alive? Your father, of course, is alive in ghetto. Uncle Moshe, he's alive in ghetto. Uncle Nathan is alive in ghetto. Aunt Esther is in ghetto with him. Her brother Ephraim is in ghetto with him. Her other brother, Philip, is in the ghetto with him. Our cousin, Hannah, she's the daughter Hannah is the daughter of Mandvoire. Her sister, Rivka, she's also the daughter of Mandvoire. They were the two people with them. From Mime Mandvoire's, Branch's family is Yosale. He's now in Toronto. Of course, my sister, my mother, and my father. And to the best of my recollection, that's all the survivors at this point of our family. Everybody else was dead by now.
Sam, was there a discussion, even before the ghetto or within the ghetto, about what the plan could be besides just surviving? In other words, was there absolute knowledge that you were enclosed there and the only reason you chose to be there is because there was no other choice?
That the first part was we were there, we had no choice. We were running out of places to be. It was winter, and I say we. I don't want to say we because I absolutely had no choice and determination what is going to be done, and neither was my sister. But the grown-ups, my mother and my father and my uncles, they determined that the only feasible thing to do now is just to go back to the ghetto and try to survive in the ghetto the best they could. Now the question arises, did they know that they were going to get killed and liquidated? They suspected it. But the way they figured it was immediate shelter to survive, and they were going to do their best to try to survive while the Germans were going to come for liquidations. And sure enough, the first liquidation, 2 weeks after everybody got in, and believe it, that within 2 weeks, to the best of my recollection, there were maybe 4,000 Jews in there from being brought in by railroad from all these other countries, plus the ones that came wandering in because they couldn't survive anymore. You're talking about 4,000 or 5,000 Jews packed into maybe 10 square blocks. I mean, you had the living conditions were, forget about it. You never undressed to go to sleep. You slept in your clothes. The typhus was rampaging, sickness from typhus. Every day people were dying from typhoid infections. Food was very scarce, right? Every 2 weeks, the Germans used to come with Latvian or Estonian police, surrender the camp real tight, the ghetto, and kill anybody that was walking. By the way, your mother was there too, in the ghetto at that point. And she was married with, that man. And the first killing, they came in and they grabbed whoever was not hiding or whoever was not running away, and whoever was sick, laying in bed, they shot dead. And in that first action, they called Aktion, right? They killed her husband. They hadn't been married long. And they killed hundreds of other people in the ghetto, and they took some into cattle cars as well. An action like this, it lasted maybe 4 or 5 hours. So you had to be able to hide someplace in the ghetto for 4 or 5 hours, otherwise you were a dead duck. That's it. Now, luck had it that I and my mother and my father and my sister, we survived every one of those. And so did your father, and so did Uncle Moshe. I mean, all our immediate family that eventually survived, we survived every one of those. That's when Hannah, a cousin Hannah, she got married. I don't know why they were getting married, but I guess they got married. And she had a baby boy, and then she suffocated the baby boy.
During the hiding.
During the hiding, and I saw that. It was an
During action?
Yeah. It was an unforgivable thing, as far as I was concerned. And I had it against the people who demanded that, and against her that executed it. But
she thought the baby would reveal your hiding spot.
No, the people said the baby would reveal the hiding spot.
The baby was crying.
Right, the baby was crying. And it made a bad impression on me. And but however, it happened.
She survived?
She didn't survive. No. She survived that action, but she didn't survive. And so As soon as the action was over, the Germans would go away, the police would go away with whatever they got. People would come out from the hiding, and the police then governing the ghetto would tell them gather all the dead people, and they would dump the dead people one on top of the other into wagons, and people would pull them into the Beis Olam, which was just about two blocks up, and bury them there. And the wounded would wait till they would die, because there was no medicine, there was no way to save them. I myself witnessed, I think, a boy, he might have not been more than 16 years, from Czechoslovakia. He played dead, he was shot in the stomach, and he did not die. And he wished he would have died, because he suffered for maybe a day and a half without anything, then he died. I remember him like today, and he said, "Ich bin nicht kein Jude," I'm not a Jew. But his grandparents were Jews, and he got shipped here, and he had the same fate as those that were Jews and were circumcised, and same thing. It was a horrible thing. And as soon as that finished, a kind of normalcy went back into the living condition in the ghetto. You know, you did the same thing as before. The men went to this temple Wache to work, and then if they wanted some people, there were numbers, and they had to supply them, and they supplied them. Of course, I don't know if they survived or they didn't. Perhaps some survived, perhaps some didn't, but they never came back to the ghetto. And new Jewish people were shipped into the ghetto. There was always coming in. So while we were in this ghetto, you're talking about November of 42, into the liquidation of the ghetto, which I believe was April 17th, 1943. The date I subsequently found, because I looked in 1943, the last day of Passover was April 1743, and when they liquidated the ghetto was the last day of Passover in 1943. So I didn't know then that it was April 17th of 43, but years later, after looking at the calendar, when was the last day of Passover of 1943, and it just happened to come out April 17. That's how I know the precise date of April 17. I wasn't aware then, in 43, that it was April 43, but it was the last day of Passover. So we survived these actions, which were probably 3 or 4 in the 3 months period, where they were grabbing the people, killing, and so forth and so forth. Now, one thing I got to tell you is that the ghetto now wasn't airtight. In other words, if you really wanted to take a chance and not be spotted by... The only problem was you couldn't get out through the front entrance of the ghetto. But let's go back to what happened to your father's confectionery, where all those good things were available 3 years back. And everything was destroyed. It was just destroyed, taken apart. Some of it was burned. And some of these buildings had holes in between them. So if you really wanted to, you could go through those holes, because the police was very loose in guarding all the whole street, because that would be like a 3-block street straight, and they did not put a fence around it. So anybody that really had their mind set could go out. And a lot of people did go out. For example, your father and Uncle Moshe and my father. You know Chaim Chu?
Yes.
Okay, Chaim Chu, him and his family were in the ghetto too, but Chaim Chu never slept in the ghetto. Every night he would go out. He had a Gentile acquaintance, and she would let him sleep. And during the day, he would come back. So people could go out, and a lot of people did go out. Not only that, there was a necessity to go out and get some food, because on the rations that were supplied by the Judenrat and the police that controlled it, you couldn't survive really. I mean, you'd die from hunger. But yet I tell you, with all the going in and going out, and at nights, kind of stealing in some food from the area around there, like my father would and your father would.
They go and bring it back.
Right. I wasn't hungry, really. I mean, I could have eaten more, but I wasn't hungry. Not only this, it's funny, this incident is kind of funny. I had a friend, a girl. She must have been maybe 12 years old. And she used to hang around with me. And we would just spend the day. And then one morning, I saw her, and I say, I forgot her name, by the way. And I say, what are we going to do today? And we used to go by the mountains there, in the ghetto, and you could just play around, loiter around, because what else could I do? And she said, well, look, I can't be your friend anymore. And I say, why can't you be my friend anymore? Well, look, you're a young boy, you wouldn't understand this. Well, you're not so old, I told her. Yeah, but I'm old enough. So what are you old enough to do? She says, you see that house over there? I knew the house, but I had, walking around this house, I knew that, it was all the bad things that were going on, and how hard it is to survive and all that. Somehow there were candlelight over there in the evening, and I was wondering, why was there candlelight there and not any place else? And a lot of men were hanging around there, women were hanging around there, But I wouldn't go ask my mother about that or anybody else. So she said, you see that house there? Never go in that house. But I have become a member over there. What are you going to do? Well, I can't tell you, she says. When you get older, maybe you'll understand. So I said, well, but she says, look, you're going to have a lot of food. I said, well, how am I going to get a lot of food? Because she says, if you're going to be every morning over here, I'll save you some food. I said, well, how are you going to get all this food? And she said, don't ask me these things, I told you. Now, what was there? Only God can imagine what was there. That must have been some, good times. I don't know what the hell they were doing there. I guess what grown-ups do, and somehow there was food there. Somehow there was lots of things there. And in that particular house, it was just, it's an amazing thing, like right in the middle of the whole ghetto and everything. And you know what? Every morning I used to meet her. She used to give me cooked chicken and cake. And I used to eat like a devil. I was very thankful to her. And she used to wear high heels. Where she got them from, I don't know. And she used to wear her hair differently. And she was only 12. At most, I would say she was 13, for God's sake. At least in my eyes, because she used to play with me. I was only a 9-year-old kid then, And so I lost my friend, but I gained a lot of food. And believe it or not, this particular house survived until the end of the liquidation of the ghetto. So it's just an episode, and the trials and tribulations of the ghetto just shows that, I guess, even under the most difficult circumstances, some things just survive. I don't know how to express it any differently. But at any rate, this was going on, and then we had more episodes of killings and liquidating people and bringing in people. and so on. And until all this is going on, and Passover 43, believe it or not, we had a little bit of matzahs baked secretly. It's amazing how the Jews hold on to tradition under the most difficult of circumstances. Isn't it amazing? Here we are in a ghetto with little food, but enough flour was smuggled in to bake a little bit of matzahs, so that there would be a remainder, remind yourself that a Passover is here. That's how strong, I guess, the Jewish tradition is. And that even in the ghetto, under the most duress of times, under the most difficult times, didn't forget Passover. And I mean, there was no celebration, and there was no festive things, but a little matzahs there was. So suddenly, one morning, the last day of Passover, by the way, I and my sister got sick with typhoid also, unfortunately.